Welcome back to the Christian Women's Health Collective podcast. This month, we are taking a little bit of a turn in how we are doing things, and we are actually sharing each week something from our specialty. So last week's podcast was about brain health and Alzheimer's prevention, which was my specialty. This week, we are going to hear from Sheri and comment on her specialty. And so I will turn it over to her.
All righty, well, thanks. So I kind of lean into eating clean, and which would help with inflammation. So we'll talk a little bit about inflammation today, because it is, I was reading a statistic, and I'm going to read it to you. It's 50% of deaths are attributed to inflammation-related diseases. So 50%. So what are, inflammation diseases? Well, they could be anything like type 2 or heart disease or cancer or arthritis. I mean, cancer and heart disease right there are some of the top ones that are going to, take you down basically. So, inflammation can be actually good also. So inflammation is like you hit your thumb with a, hammer, and you see it turn red, and you see that's your body helping heal that area. It's sending in all the, the white cells to help heal that area. So, but then there's inflammation that's chronic, and inflammation that just goes on, and it can be, it can be created by your diet. It can be created by stress. Stress is huge with that. It can also be caused by food sensitivities or even allergies to foods. So there's a lot of different areas that could create these different things or inflammation. So what are some of the symptoms of inflammation? Well, you could be looking at weight gain. You could be looking at not having really restful sleep, bloating, skin eruptions, or cystic acne. What else? Low energy, brain fog. That's a big one people have, is, issues with just not clear thinking or brain fog. Headaches and migraines. People don't relate that to potentially, their environment or what they're eating. Joint pain and congestion. So those are a lot of different areas where inflammation will show up. And I know I find with a lot of my people, like I said, people don't relate that joint pain might be having to do with something you ate. It can inflame that area. Or congestion. I know that when I do have some different food sensitivities, and gluten is one. I'm not a celiac, but I do know that if I push the envelope and I have too much gluten, or I have too much sugar, or I go for the trifecta and I have dairy with that, because God knows I love ice cream cones, which has all of those things. And chocolate, which I have more of a higher sensitivity to, then my skin will usually be the place where it will show it up. It'll show up on my chin or show up on my forehead. So yeah, I went away a couple weeks ago, and that's what happened. It came out. But like my daughter, she will have issues with bloating, when she has dairy. For me, it's not the same, and it's not the same for everybody. And another thing that I was reading today also is about autoimmune issues. And people don't realize that with autoimmune issues, and I thought this was really interesting in the way that the person that was leading it, she said she was working with a client, and they were saying, yeah, I realized I can't eat gluten, because I have autoimmune issues. And she goes, I'm good like 95% of the time. And she came back to her and said, no, that's 0% of the time, because when you eat gluten, it is going to affect you. So if you have any autoimmune issues, which is, due to inflammation, then you've got to stay away from gluten. which I know can be a difficult one. So let me know if you need help with that. So anybody else have any things to say about inflammation?
I have tons I could say about inflammation. I know every time I eat corn, every time I eat tomatoes, every time I eat, well, most vegetables, I'm that weirdo who can't process vegetables very easily. I'm every child's dream, because when I eat vegetables, they make me sick and they inflame me. And then I don't eat vegetables anymore for a long time. But what I do focus on is protein. I agree with everything that you said about gluten too. From a brain health perspective, gluten is one of the primary causes of inflammation, and inflammation is the primary cause for Alzheimer's, because it raises insulin. So 99.9% of the time, if you're inflamed, your insulin's probably resistant too, and you're gonna suffer from cognitive decline. And that's something that scares me enough to make me want to keep myself in check. Over the last couple of weeks, my husband and I have had some travel, and we've been to a wedding, and I've eaten a lot more sugar and flour than is good for me. And so I am on day 3 now of being bloated and feeling horrible and so exhausted, even after giving those things back over to, the other people who want them and not eating them myself. And yeah, my experience is coming off of those things for a long period of time. And I didn't eat sugar for 6 years, and I didn't eat anything white for 2 years, many years ago. But reintroducing those things back into my system, I don't like sugar as like I did years ago. If I have actual sugar today, it doesn't taste good to me most of the time. And then B, I'm so easily affected by those things now, with joint pain and bloating and gas. And I mean, I hardly slept Sunday night. I was so gassy. And it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. It's one thing to have it once and then go back to eating normal, but to have it consistently, not every single day, but multiple days in a week because you're in celebration mode or whatever the case may be, for me personally, it's just not worth it. And I certainly want to keep my brain healthy. So that's my experience with inflammation.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on some things from a migraine standpoint. As a migraine sufferer my entire life, it took me a long time to realize that inflammation and food allergies were the culprit of most of my chronic migraines. And sometimes hormones play into that also. But the main thing is the stressors that I had in my life that was causing inflammation. So number 1, stress can cause inflammation in your body. Any type of stress. And there's a lot of things that cause us stress, whether it's our food or our environment, our emotions, big changes in our lives, like moving or someone dying or things like that. Like stress causes inflammation. And so, which leads to then disease. So number 1, dealing with stress is huge. Number 2, food allergies that cause inflammation, and just some foods in general are more inflammatory than others, aka sugar, your number 1 culprit. Gluten, dairy, some grains like corn, and what was the other one? I lost my train of thought. Shoot, it was a big one that I was like, oh, this is it. Really, it's sugar. Sugar is like the precursor to all of the inflammation, all the bad things, all the disease, diabetes, and just insulin resistance in general. And people who are stressed out and not eating a healthy diet are more insulin resistant and therefore more susceptible to disease. And so lowering our inflammation and just lowering our stress levels and making better choices with our food are just like insanely huge steps. When I finally got rid of gluten and dairy in my diet for good, I didn't have a migraine for at least 6 months.
Nice.
till I got into a stressful situation, ate some things I shouldn't have, and then I got a migraine. So, it's a cascade. It's never just one thing, right? Like, you have a stressful situation, you eat a bunch of sugar, maybe you have a glass of wine with dinner, and then you decide, oh, cheese is a good idea. So like so many things all at once, then you're like, okay, yeah, I pretty much guaranteed myself I was going to have a migraine after all that. You know what I mean? So learning to make wise choices now for future me is where I'm at, because I've learned to say, like, nope, I know how that's going to make me feel, and it is not worth it. It sounds good right now, and it might taste good for a few minutes, but do I really want to suffer with a migraine for 3 days after I eat that? Probably not. Probably not worth it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. The other thing is, I mean, obviously I have to give fasting a plug, because you get so much gut healing, and die off of all of that bad bacteria, so much healing inside your body. It lowers inflammation so much. And so I honestly can't say enough about fasting when it comes to lowering inflammation, in addition to, not eating gluten and sugar so much and those kind of things. So yeah. So if you suffer from migraines, you might want to consider what Sheri's saying about reducing inflammation, because it could help a lot.
I think it's interesting. I've been sitting here taking notes, and it's almost like the miss of life when you think about what healthy is. I've been talking to some dietitians and just kind of researching where people get their information from and why sometimes we share processed foods or things like that. Because Bree, you mentioned grief, and grief is huge inflammation driver. So you take a traumatic shock to the body, to the microbiome, to everything about you, no matter where you were before. In your new state, it is all about inflammation, and you carry it to the point of, I can feel my inflammation rise, and it lives in you. So not knowing those things, and through all the research, what has been the most amazing parts to me about inflammation is not only where you get it, but how it affects your daily life. Like, it affects everything you do. It affects how you live out your life. It affects how you exercise, everything, your gums, your body, everything. But what you put into your body is really kind of the trigger to that inflammation. So it's like, okay, do you want to live this life in pain and in a sore hip? Or do you want to make these sacrifices and try to find ways where you can still accommodate your diet, be at ease these triggers? Because once I started easing some of those triggers, life did change. The problem is keeping up the pace for me and finding that balance of, okay, you don't have to eat that whole box of cookies because it's Saturday, like and who cares if they're only, the little small thin pack with, that's, you don't have to do that. That's where I struggle. And that's where also I have to give myself grace and say, Julie, you're human. This is real life. You're trying. But I think also the part of learning from you guys, I think the beauty of it is it's almost like the things that we teach and we see is so unique, because here we bring it all together. And so the conversations that have been led with like the people that are teaching it is, how do we get off track from knowing what healthy really is versus healthy is really not when it comes to our immune system? Like, the things we put in it frazzles it from the get-go. Why do we not teach that in healthy, ways to begin with? So I think for me, from like a grief standpoint and then a kidney coach standpoint, it really hits home, because it's life altogether. And then Sheri, you said, like, we were talking, I think it was on here, was it? You were talking about like 50%. That's huge, Anyway, it's interesting to me how hard it is not to put the bad things in your mouth. But I also think it's really cool that there are new ways that we can feel like those desires, or we can feel the urge to eat the bad, and to kind of guide yourself, And that's what I'm working on, is how do I guide myself so that I know this is good for me or this is bad for me, or and the all gluten. Yep. And some of it's choices too. So having to rechange our choices.
Mhm. Well, coming from an
Always a
addicted
choice.
personality, I can honestly say that I am that person who feels like I need to eat it all now and then start all over again tomorrow. And I've always been that mentality of I ruined my day with this meal, so I may as well, you know what I mean? And I'm better about that now than I ever was before, but having that mentality about me and recognizing it helps a lot in the choices that I make. And I'm not perfect at it at all. I agree, we are human, but it's also just having education around the damage that's done has made
Yeah.
a huge impact on my choices. So I might make a bad choice this week and next week, but I also know what the ramifications are if I continue, and I will snap out of it so fast today versus 15 years ago. So that's what we're here for, right, is to help people understand the ramifications of those choices, because that's where the damage is done.
It's the continuing on. It's
Mhm.
the small steps that, we always say that the small steps that make big strides, but that's really the truth, because it's the continuing on that's doing the damage. So when you're making efforts,
Mhm.
the big part's learning what is really in gluten, what is not. That's for another day, another time, because there's so much stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, well, we will move into our training session now, but before we do, I just want to let you know that we are really, really excited about what this podcast has to offer. We're more excited about what our training has to offer. We thank you for tuning in. If you're watching the podcast or listening to it, we're on all the podcast platforms. So find us anywhere that you listen to your podcast. You can find us. We're Christian Women's Health Collective on all the podcast platforms. And we will soon be on Rumble. I am the one responsible for that, so I'll have us up on Rumble soon. And in the meantime, if you choose not to join the membership, it's only $7 a month. Come join us. Don't forget to
Like,
Subscribe.
Yeah.
and click that notification bell so you know every time we put out a new podcast. And we'll see you next week.
In the sky, don't let me fall like this again.